Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a deeply profound, almost uncomfortably accurate psychological mirror hidden way back in ancient history. We're talking about a figure named Terah. Now, usually, Terah just gets totally glossed over as a random name in a genealogy list. He's just the father of Abraham. But when we actually dig into the source material, his story is incredibly rich. He represents this ultimate threshold between human civilization and divine calling. But honestly, more than that, his life is just the perfect, heartbreaking illustration of a deeply human tragedy, the interrupted journey.
I mean, think about it for a second. Have you ever started a massive life change only to completely stall out halfway through? It's a pretty universal human experience, right? We get this overwhelming urge to leave our comfort zones. Maybe we want to break a toxic habit, change careers, or just seek a deeper sense of truth. We take that first massive, wildly courageous step, and then, for whatever reason, we just prematurely settle. We find a new plateau, and we just stop. Well, it turns out this isn't just a modern psychological quirk. It's an ancient one. And as we break down Terah's story, you're going to see exactly how much this guy mirrors our very own tendencies to just settle. But to really get it, we have to start at the beginning. Section 1, the comfort of artificial stability and life in the city of Ur. So Terah lives in a place called Ur of the Chaldeans. And I think a lot of times we automatically picture these ancient biblical figures wandering around some primitive desert. But Ur was a highly mature, advanced civilization. It was the absolute pinnacle of human striving. Think a highly structured life, an organized economy, social order, and entirely constructed religious systems. It was incredibly safe. Canaan, on the flip side, was the ultimate destination of a divine calling. It represents the total unknown, the unpredictable, wild nature of true revelation. Terah was a guy who was very comfortable in his safe, artificial stability. Honestly, it's a lot like the modern, highly structured corporate or social systems we find ourselves so easily trapped in today. But here's the thing. That artificial stability, it comes with a steep spiritual cost. In Ur, God is no longer directly known, but indirectly imagined. You see, after the scattering at Babel, humanity dispersed. The source text points out that while civilization became super organized, it wasn't necessarily aligned with actual truth. People were still religious, sure, they were still seeking, but they were doing it through systems shaped by culture, not actual revelation. Divine reality was essentially swapped out for constructed representations. So this is the world Terah lived in, a world of really established, highly systematic, but ultimately spiritually detached ambition. Which makes what happens next kind of mind-blowing. Section 2, the courage to leave, a departure without a map. Against all conventional wisdom, Terah just decides to leave the highly structured, totally predictable life of Ur. He grabs his family, Abram, Sarai, Lot, and initiates this massive break from the very civilization that defined who he was. And the core concept here is so powerful: movement before clarity. When you actually read the Genesis narrative, there is zero recorded divine speech to Terah. No booming voice, no specific command, no clear promise of a shiny reward at the end. And yet, he goes. He just steps right out of the known world into something completely undefined. I mean, that tells us something profound about the human spirit, doesn't it? Sometimes the journey towards something greater literally has to begin before we have the full picture. It just starts as this disturbance in your gut, this undeniable sense that where you are is not where you're supposed to stay. Terah had the immense courage to actually initiate that movement. If we look at the physical and spiritual map of this progress, it builds over time. You start with the scattered origins at Babel, then the years of safe, established civilization in Ur. Then Terah begins his travels, but suddenly the journey just halts at Haran. That grand, unbelievably courageous momentum just abruptly stops dead in its tracks. And the unreached promise of Canaan, that gets entirely left for future generations to deal with. And that brings us to Section 3, the tragedy of stopping short, and the archetype of incompletion. So Terah reaches this place called Haran, and he just decides to build a permanent camp there. He essentially settles in the in-between. It totally subverts the classic hero's journey, right? He doesn't retreat back to the safety of Ur, but he doesn't push forward to the destiny of Canaan either. He becomes this tragic archetype, the man who leaves but does not arrive. And look, we really need to look at Terah with empathy here, not judgment. Terah isn't defined by some arrogant, outright rebellion against God. He's not a Nimrod figure. He isn't defined by a massive moral collapse either. He is simply defined by incompletion. And honestly, isn't that just the most deeply relatable human condition? Partial obedience, partial movement, partial transformation.
Think about how many lives today are defined by that exact same thing. We don't necessarily outright reject our higher calling, we just stop a few miles short. We settle. So we really have to ask the critical psychological question here. Section 4, the weight of unresolved grief. Why exactly do we settle?
Terah's halt in Haran is literally a masterclass case study for our own modern behavior. There are 3 subtle dynamics at play. First, movement without fulfillment. Terah clearly proves he's capable of making a change, but he completely lacks the endurance to actually sustain it. Second, the weight of loss. And third, an attachment to stability. You see, leaving Ur required this explosive, dramatic burst of courage. But continuing past Haran, that requires quiet, grinding endurance. The first step of any major journey is often super dramatic and exciting, but the continuation is usually tedious, quiet, and really, really hard. Terah finds a place that is just good enough, and ultimately, his attachment to stability wins out over his calling.
But to really, truly understand this, we have to look at the emotional core of the text. Terah is anchored by an unresolved past. Before they ever left Ur, Terah suffered a devastating loss. He lost his son. And his son's name was Haran. Just let the psychological weight of that sink in for a second. Terah begins this massive, world-altering journey, carrying an immense, heavy burden of unresolved sorrow. And where does his journey permanently stop? At a geographical location that bears the exact same name as his dead son, Haran. Guys, that is not a coincidence. It is a massive echo of memory. It shows us that sometimes human beings stop moving forward not because they lack a map or lack direction, but because they are still heavily anchored to the unresolved grief standing right behind them. Despite this quiet tragedy, though, Terah's historical footprint is absolutely vital. Section 5. A bridge to true calling and initiating what others complete. We can't view Terah as just a failure in some simplistic way. Yes, he is unfinished, but he represents a totally necessary first step. He actually illustrates a really vital biblical pattern. Terah does the heavy foundational listing. He initiates the departure. He actually breaks his family out of the suffocating artificial stability of Ur. He just stops at the threshold. But because he did that incredibly heavy lifting, Abraham is positioned to resume the journey. Abraham gets to enter the covenant and fulfill the divine promise. The reality is, without Terah leaving Ur, there is no call for Abraham. Without that initial, messy, incomplete movement, there is no covenantal journey. It's this beautiful, difficult pattern where one generation initiates the painful break from the past, specifically so the next generation can fulfill the ultimate calling. Ultimately, Terah stands as the literal and metaphorical border between 2 completely different worlds. Right behind him lies Babel, Nimrod, and the highly structured, self-directed human ambition of Ur. And right before him lies Abraham, the covenant, the promise, and a totally divinely guided relationship. Terah prepped for ground. He stepped bravely in the direction of the call, even if he couldn't personally bring himself to realize its full completion. He's the man standing right at the border. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to take this ancient mirror and turn it firmly back toward us. Where is your Haran? Where in your own life have you sensed a pull towards something greater, made a really bold initial departure, but then quietly, almost without noticing, settled midway? Are you lingering in a place that's just good enough? Or maybe, like Terah, are you anchored by an unresolved past? Is there a grief or a fear keeping you from your ultimate destination? Terah's story is unfinished, and it leaves us with a challenging question of whether ours is too. Take some time to reflect on your own journey. Ask yourself what it's actually going to take to resume the path, to step out of the in-between, and to finally arrive.